Hey there everybody, I hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining me for another pixel art video, in fact the first pixel art video that I've recorded entirely in Japan. So today's video is going to look at some techniques to help speed up the process of creating pixel art. And one of the most time consuming aspects is actually drawing the initial outline, I find, because this is the part that is hardest to project onto a screen. It's quite straightforward when you're drawing on paper when you're used to it, but there's just something about getting it onto a vertical surface that's flat that can be quite time consuming. And with the move to Japan, I need to speed up my ability to get artwork out, because artwork is going to be a way that I'm going to fill some of my income gap which I still have in the UK. So here I've drawn basically an outline of Ranma Saotome from Ranma 1/2. I usually draw my outlines using uniball markers. A 0.1 or 0.3 tip is usually the best to use, I find, for these. From this basic outline I can trace it to create a coloured in version using Copic markers, and also you can see here the actual final result that we're going to be aiming towards. So I took a picture of Ranma with my phone using an app called Scannable. It's available in the iPhone store, and I'm pretty sure it's available for Android as well. This is really good at getting in images nice and clean and sorts out much of the perspective issues, so do check it out if you don't have a scanner. In Photoshop I use the threshold tool. This allows the image to be reduced down to just black and white very cleanly. Once I've got a good black and white image, I'll then just clean up the image very quickly using the eraser or the pen tool. This allows me to have a clean outline when I bring it into my pixel art package, be that Sprite or something on a retro system like Deluxe Paint. I don't spend too long doing this because a lot of it is going to be cleaned up when we actually bring it into our pixel art package anyway. Once I'm happy with the outline, I'll reduce the pitch down to index colour in Photoshop. This means that I can be precise about there only being two colours in this image. I've then drawn out some simple guides which are going to allow me to crop the image very accurately to the outline that I've created here. Now that I've cropped the image, I just make sure that I've not cropped off any important details, and then I'll reduce the height to the maximum height of the image that I want to be editing. In my case, on my Amiga using Deluxe Paint, I don't want to have an image any taller than 256 pixels tall. One little trick that I'd recommend is that just before you resize your image is to convert it back to use an RGB colour and then resize, because whilst it'll end up with a slightly grayscale and smoothed outline when you do the resize, it will allow you to do the threshold over again and just make it as defined as you want. Without this you could lose a lot of detail. So now in the threshold tool I can just judge at what kind of width of outline I want. I try to aim for a singular pixel width of outline around most of the edges, although you will find that there will be a bit of doubling up. Once I'm happy with the outline, I will then be able to OK this and save this out as a 2-colour bitmap. I'm saving this straight out as an IF format, which is Amiga's standard graphics format. This allows me to load it direct into Deluxe Paint. However, if you're using a package like Sprite or a modern package for doing your pixel art, the format that I would recommend is PNG. So now that we've got our image in our pixel art package, in my case Deluxe Paint on the Amiga, but you could quite easily choose something like Sprite, we need to clean up the lines to make sure they're nice and smooth. And the way that we do this is through stepping the pixels. If you're not entirely sure what I mean by stepping the pixels, I'd recommend following the video available in the top right now. In short, stepping the pixels ensures that we have a nice even line that makes our outline for our pixel art. It involves the process of making sure that we don't swing wildly between having 2 pixels that go across, then 4, then 3, then 5. It's just making sure that everything is nicely, gradually either going up in the amount of pixels or going down, so that we end up with a nice smooth line. You can see this process being worked on here with the outline that we have brought into Deluxe Paint on the Amiga. This process in total took me around about 40 minutes to get about right, so don't expect this to happen immediately. It also ensures that we don't end up with any gaps in our drawings, so that way, for example with the hair, when we come to actually shade this in, we'll have a nice decent outline to work with. You'll be aiming for your basic outline to just have 1 pixel width in most places, because our shading will allow us to add the depth and density to this outline, which is going to give it dimension. But for now, for your simple black and white outline, just try to stick to 1 pixel's width for all of your outlines. The one major exception to this is around Ranma's eyes. So for example, where the eyelashes are, I've maintained that those lines are actually quite thick, just to hint at the actual depth of the eyelashes that will be evident here. I generally don't add in details at this stage, unless just to patch in where the lines have become a bit faint through the threshold process that we used in Photoshop. I also work to improve some of the little details, so for example with the hands and the feet, just making sure that the hands look a little bit more natural in places. Once it comes to the process of actually shading in the pixel art, I will start with a limited amount of colours, so just using 8 colours. As you can see here, I've already flood filled in the major parts of the image just to make sure that I've got the basic colour allocations sorted out. From here I'll gradually increase the colours as I need them, but this allows me to keep the amount of colours I'm using down to a minimum. On a modern system, obviously you can use as many colours as you like, but if you're hoping to use your pixel art on an older system, such as maybe a Super Nintendo, a Mega Drive, the Amiga or similar, then you're going to need to keep within certain colour restraints. One key aspect to making sure your pixel art looks as good as it can be is to gradually remove the black outline which you have in place and instead replace it with a darker value of the colour that you're actually using just inside of the outline. This gives a very distinctive look that looks natural, but also just enhances the actual overall composition of your pixel art. I will predominantly use the line tool instead of the freehand tool. This allows me to be as expressive as I like, from the single pixel to be able to use strokes as I do in the hair to allow me to get the shading just right. It's quite a good tool to have because sometimes not all of us have perfectly steady hands. I will occasionally slip back into the freehand tool when it's required, but in the main, the line tool is always my friend. Another technique that I use is a lifted black point. This means that there is never a pure black in the image, so I will just always lift the base tones just slightly above the black point. So instead of using black, for example, I've used a slightly lifted red tone, so nothing touches the 0 value in the colour registers. You don't always have to do this, it depends on what style you're looking for. There are plenty of pixel art games or pieces of pixel art that have been created in the past that do use pure black and look amazing, but it was a style that started to become more predominant in the later era of the Super Nintendo, for example, such as with Tales of Fantasia and Star Ocean that used a lifted black point, and I quite like it and I feel that it works really well here, so maybe just consider what you're going to use for your base value. I think it works pretty well here because it allows the predominant red hue of the image to really shine through here and just emphasises the clarity of the overall image. It also means that the outline just looks less harsh, blends in nicely and reduces the impact of having to do too much anti-aliasing. Talking of anti-aliasing, you'll want to make sure that you try to avoid using anti-alias around all of the edges. You don't want to end up with a pillowed effect, which essentially is like an embossed look to your pixel art outlines. I do occasionally use it in a few places, such as on Ranma's pigtail, just because it allows the dimension to shine through that there is actually braids in the hair here. Another important aspect is how I mix my colours. I will always use HSL or HSV sliders instead of RGB. It comes down to personal preference, but I find it much more accurate and much quicker to use the HSL sliders for mixing colour. I previously put together a video all about HSL colour, so I do recommend that you check it out. It will help you to learn how to mix colours much more accurately and much more consistently, allowing your beautiful designs to really shine. My other top tip, especially when you're starting out, is to just make sure that you work consistently. And the way that I'm doing this is from working from top to bottom overall. This means that I don't dot about the image, working on the feet, and then the hands, and then the hair, and then back to the hands, and then the arms. I just make sure I work from top to bottom. This allows me to focus on one particular element, for example the hair, and then perhaps working on the arms, and it just means that everything ends up looking nice and consistent. When I start to get towards the end of the image, I may start to dot about a bit more because I'll notice things that in the overall balance of the image need a bit of work just to make sure they look consistent. But I would recommend either working from bottom to top or top to bottom. I prefer top to bottom because this is usually where the face will be, and I always feel much better when I can see the pixel art working when I know that I've got the face and the details with the hair beginning to look how I imagine them in my mind's eye. Another important aspect with any instance of drawing, and this includes pixel art, is to always remember your direction of light. Where is your main light source coming from? Where is your most dominant light source coming from? Because potentially you could be designing a piece of pixel art that has more than one light source, but you'll usually have a dominant light source. So for this piece of pixel art of Ranma, I have my dominant light source coming in from the top left, which means that the shadows will be on the right hand side of the image. Ensuring that you keep this consistency with where your dominant light source is will ensure that your pixel art looks professional, and also you'll enjoy the result much more as well. All of these tips are ones that I've mentioned in the past, so none of these should be a surprise to you if you have watched a few of my videos in the past. But applying them consistently is what's going to make you feel so much better about your pixel art creations. Another top tip if you're working on a character, or perhaps for example you have enough room to do so, is to add details into the clothing, so where the creases are, where the folds are, but be careful not to overdo it. You don't want to overwork your pixel art, you want to retain a balance between detail and simplicity. The last stage is to look at your piece of pixel art once you think you've completed it. Are there any things you can improve on? Are there any obvious mistakes? Are there shadows emerging from the wrong side? Is there shading that can be worked on a little bit more just to improve its clarity? In my instance, I actually noticed there was something missing from my original outline. I've not actually drawn Ranma's shirt correctly. Below the belt, there's something slightly strange happening here, so I've just worked to correct this last piece of the pixel art. Well, that wraps it up for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, please be sure to put them in the comments below. I'll be glad to get back in touch with you. And you may also wish to look at my Patreon page, which is linked to in the description. More details on that coming up, on how you can get exclusive access to content that is not available to the general public, and priority in me answering your questions directly. So to finish up with, I'll show you the speed draw of the entire shading process of the Ranma character that we've been looking at today. Well, that wraps up today's video. Thanks for watching, and I guess that all remains for me to say is see you soon. Peace! I'd just like to mention that I'm now on Patreon, where from as little as $2 per month you can help support my artwork that I aim to create in Japan, and the tutorials and all the exciting animation tips, pixel art tips, watercolour and even manga tips that I wish to give to you whilst I'm here. You'll also receive early access to content, videos that are not available to the general public, artwork free to post, and much more besides depending on the tier that you join. To find out more, why not follow the links in the video description now. And I'd like to make a very special thanks to my Patreons, Peter47A, Anthony Jarvis, Chris Forrester, David Gaxiola, Error42, Phil Cobley, Rushi MSX, 10 Minute Amiga Retrocast, Dave Rowland, Merlin Katamari, Joss Statey, Rob Soft, Brave Jumper, and all of my $2 patrons. Your support means a lot to me, and I'll be forever grateful. Thank you.